Well, Jim, let's wrap up here today with a little bit from the files, for the files, from the files, in the files. Mildred Burke, the file for Mildred Burke I have in the Wrestling News Archive.
The subject of the Queen of the Ring movie, in which I am starring in a scintillating part, with the premiere taking place Tuesday, February 25th at AMC Stony Brook in Louisville, with many of the stars, including myself, where I will put my handprint, footprint, and print in cement right out in front of the theater before the showing. Because they've just redone the parking lot. If I wait too long, the cement will dry.
How the hell are you going to do that? Are you going to just lay in the cement, or are you going to individually put your hands down, then your feet down, and your dick down?
I'm just going to kind of fall face first and waller around in it for a little while.
It sounds like a happening. Be there, folks. But Jim, let's go to the Mildred Burke file. There's a bunch of interesting things in here. Here's a folded up copy, Sunday, July 8th, 1990, from the National Sports Daily, Wrestling with the Devil by Frank DeFord. Mildred Burke created a sport and became its greatest champion, all in spite of the man, her husband, who was trying to destroy her. So there's a little bit of, from 1990, the story was already starting to get out there.
Well, of course, Frank DeFord, the mentor in the journalism category of our friend Uncle Dave, he was the guy that Dave looked up to.
Yeah, but when you put it like that, people are going to dismiss it. He's a legend in terms of sports journalism.
Well, I didn't say Dave could replicate that. I said he looked up to him. Frank DeFord was a big-time sports writer. Dave wanted to be like Frank. Don't be like Dave, folks. Be like Frank.
I have a stack here of original Mildred Burke 8x10s, all stamped with the ring on the back of it. Here's another.
That's back from the Nat Lubette days.
Here's another one. This one, Mildred Burke, World Champion Wrestler, 1955, another 8x10. Here's an interesting letter. It's kind of a part of a two-part thing here. January 1st, 1973, and this is also initialed at the bottom. I, Marilyn Bender, do hereby make the following statements of my own free will, and will declare it to be the absolute truth. Mildred Burke, the manager for the following girl wrestlers: Betty Mahaffey, a.k.a. Mae Weston; Opal May Ernst, a.k.a. Rita Bennett; Gilda Marie Vagnon, and myself, Marilyn Bender, booked us all in the state of Kentucky for a Mr. Saul Weingroff and a Mr. Phil Golden.
Phil Golden. Marie Vagnon, or Vagnoni, was the girl that Phil Golden's All-Star Wrestling was using as their women's champion. They would have 4 matches on all these outlaw cards. It'd be a tag match, a single match, a girls match, and an opening match of either 2 midgets or 2 guys from the tag match. And she was used on almost all the shows. And Mae Weston, not to be confused with Mae Young, Mae Weston was one of the pioneer girl wrestlers that worked with Mildred Burke years before, but she had become Ma Bass and was like a Ma Barker type, but was the manager of Ron and Don, the Bass Boys. And she used to get so much heat, she got them shot at.
Did you get to see her?
On TV, but not ever live.
But on TV, you got to see her.
Yeah, she had, I think it was a cane that had a lead tip on it, and dressed in the Western string tie sometimes, in the hat. And Ron and Don Bass were either from Oklahoma or Texas or whatever, and the cowboy types. That was real early in both of their careers. But anyway, yes. So the point is, because they were an outlaw group, and Saul Weingroff was booking probably for Phil Golden, they couldn't get Moolah's talent. So they went to Mildred Burke, who in the early 70s was trying to train her own girl stable to try to replicate the glory days. And these girls that are being talked about here were those girls. And she did send them at one point on a tour of Japan for, it was the IWA at that point, right? The third group over there.
When we go back to this letter, Mildred Burke told Mae Weston that she could keep all her money if she would look after her business and send back the booking fee from the other 3 girls. Mae Weston immediately started to double-cross Mildred Burke by telling the girls that our contract with Mildred was no good and could be broken at any time. As Mildred Burke's contracts read, 25% to manager after transportation, she said she would book us for 10% and drive us around to the matches. Hold on, let me stop there. What do you think of that? Mildred's deal was 25%, and then Mae Weston said she'll do it for 10% and she'll drive them.
Well, because Mildred's, that was Moolah's deal, wasn't it? 25%, maybe a little more if she could get it. But Mae Weston's like, no, fuck you. I'll do it for less and I'll drive you. She wanted to take over the girls so she could get the girls booked in all of those towns. And Mildred Burke at the time, wasn't she living in California?
That's right.
It was her name and her reputation especially in Japan, but in some of these outlaw groups that got the girls booked. But Mae Weston was the one on the ground that had been with her since the start, but now she's thinking, I can take this thing over from Mildred.
Back to Marilyn Bender's letter here. Mae Weston also said that Mildred Burke would soon be out of business. And no time did she let us know that she was permitted to keep all her money and still complained about the contract. We were overcharged on our transportation, and at times she opened our envelopes and we did not even know how much we really had been paid, but had to take her word for it. We did not know that we had worked for 6 weeks before Mae Weston sent any bookings to Mildred Burke or even contacted her only one time at Mildred Burke's insistence. Everything she did or said was detrimental to Mildred Burke's business and moral character, even to the point of causing friction between Mildred Burke and the promoters. For one thing, knocking all of Mildred Burke's other girls in order to keep her from getting any more bookings for this or any other area. One instance, I know for a fact, that Mildred Burke had booked a new girl into Kentucky to replace me when I had to leave for Japan. Her name was Valerie Griffin. I know that Saul Weingroff had agreed to this booking because I heard them talking about using her in a tag team match. In tag team matches. When the girl arrived, she was told that Mildred Burke had not booked her there, and she was stranded. After several weeks, she was given a few shows so that she could return home, still believing that Mildred Burke had lied to her about being booked. I know that she was booked because I heard the promoter and etc. talking about the booking of Valerie Griffin. I personally intend to let Valerie Griffin know that Mildred Burke did not lie to her. Let me stop it here for a second. Again, dated January 1st, 1973. What are your thoughts on this women's wrestling drama here outside of the Moolah camp? Less popular, less publicized than the Moolah camp, all this happening.
Well, I mean, again, it's, somebody trying to undermine a booking agent and take their talent away through hook or crook and then make a profit by turning around and booking them with the promoters. That's as old as wrestling. And the thing with Mildred, or the girl getting stranded and not having a way home, I'm wondering, did they just have her sleeping in a fucking sleeping bag under the overpass, or they let her hang around in this town for a couple of weeks to starve her to the point where she'd take the job at blah, blah, blah. But the same thing happened to the Headbangers once when they were the Spiders before they came into, I think it was before they came to Smoky Mountain. They went to Arkansas for Burt Prentice, where he had started a territory, and they were working 6 nights a week in his territory for very little money. But then one morning, all the wrestlers woke up and Burt was gone and the territory was closed, and some of them didn't have enough money to get home. I think that maybe they came to Tennessee from Arkansas Because it was halfway to New Jersey. At least they'd be further home. But sometimes you get stuck in those days.
Back to Marilyn Bender's letter/declaration. There is no doubt in my mind that Mae Weston is trying to steal Mildred Burke's business, girls, and even her champion that she has spent 3 years trying to build up. We are speaking of Marie Vagnon. Is that how you pronounce that?
I'll go with that. Vagnone, for those of you who are wondering why we're trying to figure it out.
Who has now sent in her written notice to quit wrestling. It is unfortunate that Mae
And
Weston...
apparently she did, because you ain't never heard from her again.
It is unfortunate that Mae Weston is Marie Vagnon's aunt. It's all just so incestuous. I'm signing these statements in the hopes that it will stop some of the injustice that Mae Weston is doing to Mildred Burke, who has a legal contract sanctioned by the California State Athletic Committee. These contracts are valid worldwide and apply to Mae Weston, Opal Ernst, aka Rita Bennett, Marie Vagnon, as well as myself. Mildred Burke has many girls, and most of them are better wrestlers than any of those mentioned above, including myself.
Including me.
In my opinion, Mae Weston should be made to pay her percentage of her booking fee to Mildred Burke for all of her matches in Kentucky, as she did not look after the business to Mildred Burke's best interest. But to bring her great harm, I know I was there.
I was there. I knew that's the way it was going to end up.
That's
I
interesting.
know who you are, and I saw what you did.
Obviously, it ended up in this file, but we don't know who it was sent to and how it got here. So it's an interesting little artifact. Here's a picture of Mildred Burke and Mae Weston. Here's the one and only world champion girl wrestler, Mildred Burke, 8x10 with her famous belt. Here's her sunbathing. Mildred Burke, world champion lady wrestler, suntanning at her California home. A lot of these photos are photos you may have seen. Here's Mildred Burke.
You know, do you have any Mae Weston bikini photos? From what I remember, they used to put those in prison to cure the sex offenders.
Here's a photo of Mildred Burke with a headlock on Al Jolson of radio and screen fame. And as I go through these...
He said, Mammy!
Again, lots of photos from all over the place. Some of these are labeled. I am looking for... Here's an article on Queen of the Mat. But this appears to be quite old. Here is something from the desk of Stanley Weston. He appeared to doodle a lot. Lots of drawings of men on here. Here's a girl wrestler, Mildred Burke's protege, Holly Howard, girl wrestler, Sun Valley, California. It's a picture of her with a man in an airplane spin. You familiar with Holly Howard at all?
Never heard of Holly Howard, or Holly Hawk for that matter, but that was unfortunately what the last, 15 or 20 years of Mildred Burke's involvement in wrestling was living in California as a kind of a kindly grandmotherish type, training girl wrestlers that didn't really ever go anywhere or make any names because she was shut out from booking them anywhere important.
There's some black and white photos that aren't even good, some of them are blurry, but they're all stamped for booking. Contact Worldwide Women's Wrestling Association.
The WWWA, yes.
Van Nuys, California, or call Mildred Burke. And it has her phone number with a 213 area code. And a lot of these are stamped. And a lot of these feature women I've never seen before in wrestling. And an older Mildred Burke. It's weird seeing her with the belt as a little old lady. Here's a picture. This is from a tribute to Jim Londos. It's Mike Mazurki, Mildred Burke, Jim Londos, and George Parnassus while Jim Londos cuts a cake. And then there's another one here. George Parnassus, Mike Mazurki, Mildred Burke, Jane Sherrill, Scarlett, Hardy Kruskamp, and Rama Franco. So this tribute to Jim Londa sounds like a real party.
Yeah, boy, I tell you what, they stayed up till all hours that night.
So I got these photos here of a protest in front of the Olympic Auditorium, and I got the letters that correspond to it. The main event at the Olympic was Rivera versus John Tolos. Victor Rivera versus John Tolos, roller games Saturday and Sunday. And Mildred Burke and her women wrestlers are they're in their gear. She's just dressed like an old lady. But they have placards. We want minimum pay of $50 for each girl per night. Another sign says unfair to local talent. Another sign says we want equal rights for women wrestlers. Mildred Burke holding up a sign that says, if you like girl wrestlers, please write to Governor Ronald Reagan, Sacramento. And then another sign, we want a girls wrestling match on every wrestling event. These photos were taken by a photographer, Phil Miller, Highland, California.
Well, and that's the thing at that time. That was 1975 if the main event was Rivera and Tolos, right?
73.
73. Sorry, I was 2 years off. That is 1973, if memory serves me correct, like the Iron Chef, was where they lifted the ban in New York on women's wrestling. Moolah made the first appearance in the Garden. Was there a ban on women's wrestling in Los Angeles at that time, or was it just as because I remember seeing pictures of Moolah's girls and Peggy Patterson and etc. in the Olympic Auditorium. Was it just they weren't using Mildred Burke's wrestlers? And
I think
she wanted to push the issue. Why won't you book local talent? We live in California. They're bringing these girls in from South Carolina, that type of thing.
So the earlier letter I read was from January 73. This Phil Miller letter is from June 11th, 73, so later in the year, 6 months later. Dear Norm, got your first issue under the new format. Looks really good. Incidentally, I received 2 copies, so check your mailing list. Enclosed are a couple of stories. Norm, I wish you would really blast Mildred Burke for her tactics in trying to get her incompetent girls work in LA. In case you're not familiar with the case, here's the background. A couple of years ago, Mildred started a girls' wrestling school in North Hollywood. While Mildred was a great wrestler in her day, she's in no physical condition to teach wrestling personally, and the girls she trained were really exceptionally poor workers. The Olympic used 2 of them and found them so bad that the guarantee was paid after the first match and they were dismissed, not finishing the 5 shows covered by the money. Let's stop there for a second. So they were booked for the Olympic, a 5-match guarantee to use women wrestlers. They were so bad that Mike LaBelle, who was really famously, tight with a buck, he was like, you know what, just keep the money, don't come back.
Yeah, well, and obviously they had him come in for a week. The deal for 5 shows, that would have been a week in the LA territory. And, they said, oh, fuck, we can't put this out in front of people again. Here, just go away.
When the Forum tried competition to the Olympic, Mildred had several of her girls on the 2 cards the Forum had before they shut down. This double cross angered Mike LaBelle, and he would not use Mildred's girls, even though she had acquired contracts on a couple of good workers trained elsewhere. Finally, LaBelle did use a couple of Millie's girls. Jane O'Brien did quite well. She had received training by Panama Franco. And things
right there, look no further.
And things for Jane looked good. Then Jane went to Mexico, where she picked up the Mexican style. Too acrobatic to be believable to American fans. Jane also brought back a Mexican girlfriend, Perla Gonzalez, and caused some sensation in the Olympic by practically performing lesbian acts in the ring.
Whatever Lola wants, Lola gets.
Sure, I'll book you guys again. Just don't do anything outrageous.
Can you just drop the 69 spot?
She's been in that leg scissors for a long time, hasn't she? Let's go back to this letter here. Jane also brought back a Mexican girlfriend, Perla Gonzalez, and caused some sensation at the Olympic by practically performing lesbian acts in the ring. That finished her with LaBelle. It's well known that except for Panama and Warstar, all Mildred's girls are lesbian. Later, Panama and her daughter, Warstar, were used in Bakersfield, California. After the match, which was quite good, Moto, that's Mr. Moto, found out that Warstar is only 14 years old.
Oh, boy.
Millie's gym is open to the public and has large signs on the store-type front. People walk in off the sidewalk, watch the girls training, and immediately become, in quotes, smart. The girls bring their friends and families to watch, and they get, again in quotes, smart too. About a year ago, Millie made a deal with an LA night spot to have her girls as entertainment. The bouts in quotes, ended with one girl having the top of her tights ripped off and exposing her breasts. The commission stopped this performance after 2 shows. Let me stop for a moment here.
Yeah, but once again, it sounds like a lot more fun than Moolah's girls were at the time.
There's a lot going on here. Warstar and Panama are the only girls that weren't lesbian, according to Phil. And of course, Warstar was the 14-year-old daughter of Panama. Is that an uncommon thing? Not necessarily the age, although...
What, for them not to be lesbians?
No, for a mother-daughter team to work together.
Well, no, I've seen a few mother-daughter teams work together, but you're talking about wrestling.
Yeah, not in the Danny Hodge sense. I'm talking about in the wrestling sense.
Hey! I actually met one of Danny's mothers and daughters. And there was a granddaughter by that time. But nevertheless...
Stay tuned to the Mid-South schedule as we pick it back up soon.
That's going to come into Little Rock in about May or so. Anyway, back to this. I don't know what was going on with the 14-year-old girl. Well, I mean, in all seriousness, and we're not trying to cast aspersions, but Soraya Page, her mother is a wrestler also. She was second generation. They made the movie Fighting with My Family.
How old was Debbie Combs when she started working with her mother?
I would think she would have had to been, maybe she was certainly almost 18. Maybe she was 17 in a state that didn't require a athletic commission license, but she's working against her mother and riding with her mother's. The mother was under a mask. But I've never heard of Panama Franco or Warstar or War. Oh, fine. Neither one of them have I ever heard of. And so they were it was local indie Southern California lucha shows in a barn somewhere, probably.
What are your thoughts on, again, this is Phil Miller. He's a photographer. He's not necessarily a promoter or a wrestler. But the photographer is noticing a problem with people off the street and then their families becoming smart to the business. What do you think of that?
Well, I mean, if the photographer has to fucking be the one to report this, I've never heard of Phil Miller as a Southern California wrestling photographer, but maybe he was just doing some independent stuff and kind of on the, you've heard of Theo Errett. You've heard of some of the other
Dan
California
Westbrook.
Photographers. Oh, yes. What was his name?
Dan Westbrook.
Dan Westbrook. Yes.
Mike Lano.
Well, let's not go too far, cowboy. But, that's what I'm saying is it's the same thing especially in indie wrestling, or as we used to call it in those days, outlaw wrestling, whether it's the East Tennessee Outlaws or the Texas Outlaws or the, California Outlaws. It's just constant drama and bullshit and infighting and nattering at each other and trying to steal a town or steal a talent or just fuck the other person around. And, and just trying to, again, poor Mildred, trying to regain the glory days. She didn't really train any of those girls the first go round. She just sometimes, those who can't do teach, but those who teach are not necessarily the best doers, but they're the best teachers.
Well, let's go back to this letter from Phil Miller. In March of this year, the front page of the sports section to the LA Times Valley edition had several photos of Millie's girls and an article about the school. In the article, Millie was quoted as saying that wrestling was a show and that the promoter determined who the winner in each match would be. She also exposed all the wrestling terminology.
Oh, Jesus.
Babyface, heel, go over, kayfabe, high spot.
Wow.
Etc., etc.
So this shows one of two things, and I don't know which came first, the chicken or the egg, but it shows both why the established promoters didn't want to deal with her and or how mad she was that the established promoters weren't dealing with her. Did she say all those things because she got shut out? Probably. Or did they not want to use her because she was saying those things? But I think it's the other way around.
Yeah, is this Mario Galento on the radio?
Yeah, it's like, fuck you guys. You're fucking me around and I've put up with this for 15 years. Well, here's your goddamn deal.
In the enclosed photos, note some of the signs. Unfair to local talent. Minimum of $50 per night. This is disillusioning to fans who believe wrestlers have unusual backgrounds and earn thousands of dollars a week, especially girls. Let's stop there. That's an interesting takeaway. The idea that them protesting exposes that wrestlers aren't glamorous, successful, making lots of money athletes.
Yeah, and exactly. And that's what... Even, they didn't need to put a figure on the, minimum guarantees or whatever. They didn't need to put a figure on, but some of the guys and girls, especially at the indie level in the business, they don't understand. They think that everybody, because everybody in their social circle and everybody on their internet bubble thing is smart to the business and knows how much everybody makes and what, how the business works and all this other stuff. The average person, especially in those days, had no idea how much a wrestler made. And they did know that baseball players and football players and Joe Namath and these type of people, they're on TV. They're probably doing pretty good. But here the pro wrestlers have to strike to get $50 a night. And then the average jack-off doesn't differentiate between, but, the NWA world champions in the main event in the Olympic, he's making a fortune and they're just paying these fucking goofy local girls $50. It's just everybody's devalued.
Back to this letter here. About the only place Millie's girls can work is Japan, where they're used to make the Japanese girls look good, knocking them off. Millie has sent 14 and 15-year-old girls with only 3 or 4 weeks training to Japan for 6 or 8 week tours. The Japanese girls just beat them in almost shooting matches. It's crazy seeing all these terms in a letter in 1973. I don't know if I've ever really seen that before. Millie is also the world's best double cross artist, frequently getting a 50% kickback from promoters, then taking 33 1/3% from the girls' remaining 50%. Recently, 2 of her wrestlers traveled to Phoenix, stayed overnight, and got a grand total of $15 each. I think she's a real liability to wrestling, and that her operation should be put out of business. You can check all the above info with Jeff Walton. Enclosed are a couple more photo stories.
Well, yeah, Jeff Walton just happened to be the publicist for the LA office that they were striking against, but
I'll shoot some more color soon and send the negs to you. Regards, Phil. Once again, Phil Miller, June 11th, 73.
So there you do unto others as they do unto you. In January, she's getting screwed around, and in June, she's screwing somebody else around. That's the wrestling business.
Here appears to be the master photo of her and Jack Pfeffer with her and him in the airplane spin.
Oh, good Lord.
Yeah, see, there's a lot of stuff here you could tell based on the handwriting it came from Pfeffer. Here's Ripley's Believe It or Not with Mildred Burke. Mildred Burke, Kansas City, Missouri, champion woman wrestler, never lost a bout, can do 80 body bridges in succession. Believe it or not. And I think that's about it, because the rest of these, here's a bunch of more photos, and here's a bunch of Billy Wolf photos. Have you seen the photo of Billy Wolf playing cards by himself?
Oh, wasn't that reprinted in a book at some point in the modern era? It seems like I remember something about it, but not specifically.
It may have been, but there it is from the files, Mildred Burke, and, in a period of time where people were going to learn a lot about her, she really struggled later in life, all because of everything that went down, everything that people were about to see in the movie. She didn't die right after the movie.
Yeah, no,
ends.
it wasn't over at that point. When did she lived into the 80s, did she not?
I think so. Let me double check that. Hold on. I believe she did.
But that was the thing, is after
89. Wow.
1989, after 1956, her only involvement or presence or impact in wrestling was doing that early 70s Southern California wrestling school thing that didn't take off. She never was able to get back in anywhere except in Japan, because she was the girl when they discovered pro wrestling. She was the female champion and had a reputation there like Carl Gotch. So that was pretty much it.
Well, the interesting thing too from the two letters, obviously a very polarizing figure at that point. There were people that were appreciative of her. I mean, I assume this woman didn't write this declaration under duress. And then there are people that are working with the office, I guess, that see her a completely other way. And again, I look at it as someone who's struggling to take the one skill she has and make some money with it.
Yeah, and that was the thing, is that she never was able to do anything again. She was completely shut out after that split on a mainstream basis. That was it.
Well, perhaps if Mildred had been around today, she would have sued.
And boy, I'll tell you what, I know somebody that she could have called to stand up for her rights, to fight for her justice in a court of law, to make sure that she had equal protection under the statutes. And I'm talking about the man, the myth, the legend, the Bulldog himself.
Call Stephen P. News. If you need to sue. An outlaw mud show or two. He'll sue the rest.
Folks, I'll tell you what, if Stephen P. New at newlawoffice.com, 877-50-STEVE, had been around back in the days of Mildred Burke, he would have brought her justice. She would now be as famous as Taylor Swift if Stephen P. New had been running things, and he can do the same thing for you. He's like a New York haberdasher. If one suit don't fit, he's got another suit that he can try on, and he's going to keep suiting until that suit fits and sticks. Stephen P. New, 877-50-STEVE, newlawoffice.com.